The sound of O'Hare Airport was a chaotic symphony of hurry. The squeal of suitcase wheels on the polished tile, the disembodied voices announcing flights from invisible speakers, and somewhere in the distance, the sharp cry of a sleepy child. For me, at 72 years old, it all just blended together into a tired hum in my ears. I sat on one of those cold metal chairs, my hands resting neatly on my old handbag, feeling as small and invisible as a speck of dust in a whirlwind of other people's lives. "Now, you just sit tight right here, Mom, okay?" Brenda's voice, my daughter-in-law, was sweet as honey, but it had a sharp little edge to it, like the beautiful glaze on a piece of china that can hide the cracks underneath. "The check-in process is so complicated these days. We'll get it all sorted and be right back for you." I nodded. It was a habit worn deep into me over the years. Mark, my son, stood behind his wife. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were glued to the departures board, his hands fidgeting in and out of his pockets. I knew that sign. Mark only did that when he was telling a lie or trying to convince himself to believe one. Brenda glanced at her wristwatch, a calculated gesture to show a sense of urgency. "Oh, Mom, it's time for us to check the bags," she said, her tone cheerful but hurried. "The airline has this pesky new rule. They're weighing the carry-ons, too, just to make sure they're not over the limit. Why don't you give me your handbag? I'll tuck it into my suitcase and we can check it all in one go. You can just hold on to your coat." It sounded perfectly reasonable. Everyone knows how strict airlines are getting about luggage these days. For someone like me who hadn't flown much in recent years, believing in a new rule like that was easy enough. Besides, the thought of not having to drag that bulky bag through a crowded security line was pretty appealing. "Is that okay, Mom?" Mark chimed in, his voice full of support. "It'll be so much easier for you to get around. We'll get the bag right back for you as soon as we land." I hesitated for just a second. That handbag wasn't just personal items. It held my entire life in miniature, my wallet with my credit card, a little cash, my insurance cards, and most importantly, my little address book where I kept all my important phone numbers. It's a habit from my generation, not putting all your faith in technology. Seeing me pause, Brenda offered a reassuring smile. "Don't you worry. I'll put it right on top of the suitcase. Nothing will crush it. We just need to hurry a little bit." Put on the spot like that, and not wanting to be the one to hold things up, I finally nodded. "All right then. Thank you, dears."
"Of course, Mom. It's what we're here for," she said, taking the bag with a brilliant smile. "You just rest here. We'll be back as soon as the luggage is checked." "We'll be right back," Mark called out as they hurried off toward the check-in counters, pulling their suitcases behind them. And then they turned their backs and walked away, melting into the crowd. Brenda walked with her head held high, looking sharp in her designer coat. Mark trailed behind, his shoulders slumped a bit, as if he were dragging more than just luggage, but some invisible weight as well. I watched their backs until they were just two little dots that disappeared around a corner. They promised they'd be back, and I, without a speck of doubt, sat back down on that cold chair, believing I was just waiting. At least for the first hour. The second hour went by. I watched other families reuniting, couples kissing, excited children pulling on their parents' hands. Their flight, our flight to Honolulu, the one Brenda had called our big family vacation, was called. I stood up, paced a little, my eyes fixed on the entrance. Maybe they got stuck in security. Maybe there was a problem with the luggage. I made up 100 reasons, each one weaker than the last. The fourth hour. The sun outside the big airport windows started to dip toward the west. The harsh light softened to a tired, yellowy gold. I felt a gnawing hunger in my stomach. I reached into my coat pocket. $47.50. That's all they had left me. The truth started to creep into my mind like a trickle of ice water, cold and cruel. The sixth hour. I wasn't watching the door anymore. I sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. All around me, the world kept moving. People came, people went. Only I was left behind, a piece of old, forgotten luggage on the baggage carousel of life.
For the first time in years, I saw my son and daughter-in-law clearly, not through the soft-focused lens of love and blind hope. I saw them as strangers with cold calculations in their eyes. The 8th hour. The airport lights were on. The board announced the last flights of the day. The plane to Honolulu had taken off hours ago. There was no doubt left now. I had been abandoned. On purpose. Cruelly. I stood up, my legs numb. I started walking, not toward an exit, but toward the other ticket counters. I passed American Airlines, United, Delta, names that stood for a life I had just been kicked out of. And then I saw it, tucked away in a quiet, less-traveled corner, a Greyhound bus counter. 1 ticket to Asheville, North Carolina, the overnight bus. The woman behind the counter gave me a weary look. $42, ma'am. I handed her nearly every cent I had. She gave me back a thin paper ticket and $5.50 in change. Asheville. That was where Frank, my husband, had always dreamed of going. When I retire, he used to say, his hands turning over an old ceramic vase, we'll move to Asheville. I'll open a little gallery and we'll build it together. We never made it. The cancer took him too soon. But tonight, I was making that trip for him. For me. I used my last $5 on a dry turkey sandwich and a bottle of water. I sat at the bus station, huddled in a corner, trying to make myself invisible. The bus arrived at midnight. I climbed on, found a seat by the window, and stared out into the dark. The bus pulled away, carrying me out of Chicago, away from my old life. 14 hours on that bus. 14 hours in the dark, with only the pale yellow streetlights streaking past like ghosts. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. Why? The question just kept repeating itself. And then I remembered. Frank's will. He loved art more than anything. His collection of paintings and pottery was his legacy, worth a small fortune that could change their lives. But it wasn't just about money. It was the kind of collection any serious collector would fight for. He had left it all to me, with one very clear condition. Mark would only inherit it after I was gone. I remembered sitting with Frank and the lawyer. There was an addendum, a small detail I hadn't paid much mind to at the time. If I, for health reasons, was declared incompetent and needed to be placed in a care facility, control of the collection would immediately transfer to Mark to ensure the costs of my care. A perfect trap. Abandon me at the airport, create a story about a confused old mother who had wandered off and gotten lost. Then, with sad faces, they would go to the lawyers, to a judge, and say I was no longer fit to care for myself. They would get the collection. They'd sell it, buy bigger houses, fancier cars, and lock me away in some nursing home for the rest of my days. The bus rumbled on through the night. Outside, America was sleeping. Inside, I was waking up. As dawn began to break in the east, painting the rolling Appalachian hills in shades of purple, the Greyhound bus sighed to a stop at the Asheville station. I stepped off, my legs stiff after 14 hours. The mountain air was crisp and cool, a world away from the stuffiness of Chicago. It smelled of damp pine needles and earth after a night rain. It should have felt like a fresh start, but for me, it was just the beginning of a fight for survival I was completely unprepared for. With not a penny to my name, I had no choice. The first night, I had to find my way to a homeless shelter. The mixed smell of disinfectant, thin soup, and despair in that place still haunts me. I lay on a creaky bunk bed, clutching my coat, listening to the coughs, whispers, and quiet sobs in the dark. Me, Carol Harlow, who used to host tea parties in her rose garden, was now lying among the broken pieces of other people's lives. Shame burned in my chest. But in the middle of that humiliation, a little seed of determination began to sprout. I would not break here. The next day, I found a small church with a mossy slate roof. I went there to ask for work. The pastor, a man with kind eyes, gave me a job cleaning in exchange for a tiny room in the back and simple meals from the soup kitchen. It was a godsend.
The room was just big enough for a single bed and a small table, but it was mine. For the first time in days, I could take a deep breath. My life settled into a quiet rhythm. I spent my days polishing pews and arranging hymnals. At night, I sat alone in my room making plans. I needed money. I needed to get on my feet. But more than anything, I needed information. I had no phone, no computer. I was completely cut off from the world. One rare afternoon off, I was just wandering the quaint streets of Asheville. Little shops with hand-painted signs were nestled side by side. And that's when I saw it. A shop tucked between a coffee house and a bookstore with a faded wooden sign that read, Gus's Curiosities. Through the dusty glass window, my eyes were drawn to an object on a shelf, a ceramic vase. It wasn't large, with a jade green glaze and streaks of earthy brown. Most people would have walked right by it, but not me. Frank had taught me how to see a piece, not just with my eyes, but with knowledge and with your heart. I recognized the style immediately. Beatrice Wood, a brilliant but lesser-known potter from the 1950s. A little bell chimed as I stepped inside. The shop was crammed with things, from old furniture to rusty biscuit tins. An older man with a wild mane of white hair and a beard sat behind the counter, glasses perched on the end of his nose, reading a newspaper. He looked up, his tired eyes sizing me up. I didn't say a word, just walked straight to the vase. A small paper tag read, $25. My heart skipped a beat. It was an unbelievable bargain. But I wasn't there to buy it. Sir, I began, my voice a little shaky. This vase, it's worth much, much more than you're asking. The man, Gus, lowered his paper. He squinted at me. Oh, is that so? Are you an appraiser? His voice was gruff, a little sarcastic.
I'm not an expert, I replied, my hand gently tracing the curve of the vase. But my husband was, and he taught me. This is a Beatrice Wood. Look at this glazing technique, the intentional tiny crackles. And here, I turned it over, pointing to a faint mark, this is her signature. A piece like this could fetch several $1,000s at auction. The skepticism on Gus's face slowly melted away, replaced by astonishment. He took the vase, examining it under the light. I bought it at an estate sale, figured it was just some cheap decorative piece. He looked at me then with a completely different expression. Let me get you a cup of tea, he said, the gruffness gone from his voice. We sat in a little nook at the back of the shop, surrounded by stacks of old books and unframed paintings. Gus didn't ask much about my past. I just said I was looking for a new start. Maybe he'd seen so many sad stories in the old things he'd bought and sold that he didn't need to hear another one. He just listened. And in the end, he made me an offer. I need someone to help me sort through this mess. Someone who knows what things are really worth. Would you be interested in a part-time job? It was the lifeline I was so desperately searching for. The job at the antique shop gave me more than just a small income. It gave me a purpose. I cleaned, I organized, I researched every item. Gus's shop was like a forgotten treasure chest, and I was the one unearthing its secrets. We slowly became friends. Gus was a man of few words, but his silence was full of understanding. One afternoon, while clearing off his cluttered desk, I noticed an old silver picture frame. In the photo was a little girl, maybe 10 years old, with bright blonde hair in neat braids and a big smile showing a missing tooth. She was wearing a very unique silver bracelet with a charm in the shape of a dragonfly, its wings intricately carved. A beautiful, vibrant little face. That evening, back in my room, I decided I had to find a way to connect to the outside world. I used my first small paycheck to buy a cheap prepaid smartphone. I created a new social media account just to watch, and that's when I saw them. Brenda's account was filled with photos from their Hawaiian vacation, white sandy beaches, colorful cocktails, and the smiling, happy family. They looked so perfect. Then I stopped on one picture. It was a close-up of Brenda's face, her hair blowing in the sea breeze. A picture meant to show off her flawless beauty, but I wasn't looking at her face. I was looking at her wrist. Time seemed to stop. There on Brenda's wrist, glittering in the Hawaiian sun, was the silver dragonfly bracelet, identical to the one in the photograph on Gus's desk. A chill ran down my spine. It couldn't be. It had to be a coincidence. But a terrible feeling of dread washed over me. The world is a big place, but it's not so big that two such unique bracelets would just happen to cross my path in a single day. I went back to the shop the next day with a heavy heart. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't. When we were alone, I finally worked up the courage, pointed to the photo and asked, "This little girl, she's so lovely, Gus. Is that your daughter?" Gus looked at the photo. His gruff face suddenly softened, then crumpled with pain. "Yes," he said, his voice cracking. "My daughter. Her name was Becky." He was quiet for a long moment. "Or rather, that's the name I gave her." Then, as if a dam had broken, he told me. He told me about his wife who had passed away from a long illness. He told me about the only daughter he had loved more than life itself. 10 years ago, after her mother died, Becky, who was 23 at the time, changed. She grew cold, distant. One day, she cleaned out their joint savings account. She took him to a doctor, claiming he was severely depressed after his wife's death and was showing signs of dementia. She disappeared shortly after that. Gus, lost in his grief and confusion, couldn't fight back. He lost everything: his daughter, his money, his good name. He had to sell their home, sell nearly everything he owned, just to start over with this little shop. I listened, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed in a vice. I knew the answer before I even asked the question. "Gus," I whispered, "that bracelet. I made it for her myself for her 10th birthday," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. She said it was the most beautiful gift she had ever received. I took out my phone, opened the picture of Brenda, and handed it to him. Gus squinted, and then he froze. He took the phone, zooming in on the image. The silence in the shop was so heavy, I could hear the ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner. "Becky," he breathed, his voice a mix of horror and absolute agony. Brenda wasn't an orphan. She was a predator, and my son, Mark, was just the next pawn in her cruel game. The chill of that truth was colder than the harshest Chicago winter. Brenda wasn't just a greedy daughter-in-law. She was a monster in a well-tailored suit, and she had been practicing her particular brand of cruelty long before she ever met my son. Sitting across from Gus in the heavy silence of the antique shop, I didn't feel despair. For the first time in weeks, I felt a clear, sharp sense of purpose. This wasn't just my fight anymore.
"We can't just go to the police," Gus said, his voice low and steady, as if his pain had forged a kind of extraordinary calm. "She's too clever. The word of two old folks against a successful woman? They won't believe us without undeniable proof." The next day, he took me to a small law office on a street shaded by old oak trees. We met with a Mr. Davies, a lawyer in his 70s and an old friend of Gus's. He had a full head of slicked-back white hair and sharp eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. He had the unhurried air of lawyers from a bygone era. He listened, which is an art the modern world seems to have forgotten. We told him everything. I told him about the airport, about Frank's will. Gus told him about Becky, the stolen money, the pain of being declared mentally unfit by his own child. Mr. Davies didn't interrupt once. When we finished, he sat in silence for a moment, his fingers steepled on his old oak desk. "This isn't a simple family dispute," he said finally. "This is a pattern of calculated abuse. And people like that, they tend to be very confident. We're going to use that confidence against them." His plan was simple but bold. "Don't attack," he advised. "Let them walk right into the trap. You continue with your life, Carol. Gus, you find every piece of old paperwork you can. When they show up, you call me immediately.
We will let them convict themselves on the very stage they've chosen. And so we did. Gus dug through old boxes, finding bank statements from 10 years prior, a few old letters, and most importantly, the birth certificate for one Rebecca Becky Miller. I wrote out a detailed statement, remembering every word, every action Mark and Brenda took at the airport. And then, one day, they came. It was a gray, drizzly Tuesday afternoon. I was alone in the shop, polishing a porcelain tea set. The bell over the door chimed. I looked up, and my heart just about stopped. In walked Mark and Brenda, followed by a man in a suit who had to be their lawyer. Brenda smiled, a smile whose chilling falseness I could now see right through. "Mom," she chirped, as if she'd just found a misplaced trinket. "Thank God we finally found you." I set the teacup down. My hand didn't shake. I wasn't lost, Brenda. I knew exactly where I was. Gus, as planned, had quietly slipped into the back room the moment he saw them. I knew he was on the phone with Mr. Davies and the police. My job was to stall. Their lawyer stepped forward, placing a thick file on the counter. "Mrs. Harlow, I'm the family's attorney. We're here to help you. We're very concerned about your mental state. This is the paperwork to have you admitted to a first-class care facility where you'll be safe." "Safe from whom?" I asked, my voice sharp. "From my own son and daughter-in-law?"
"Mom, what are you talking about?" Mark cut in, his tone a mix of worry and frustration. "We've been looking everywhere for you. You just disappeared without a word." "I didn't disappear," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I was left. You took my credit cards, left me with a less than $50, and abandoned me in O'Hare Airport for 8 hours. Brenda let out a dramatic sigh. "Oh, Mom, your memory really is failing you. We told you we'd be right back. You must have wandered off and forgotten." "You see," she said, turning to the lawyer, "this is why we have to do this, to protect her, and to protect Dad's legacy." "You don't want to protect Frank's legacy," I growled. "You want to steal it. You want to declare me incompetent to get your hands on that collection." Mark lost his patience. His face twisted, not in pure anger, but in a strange performance of exasperated grief. He picked up a pen, but instead of forcing it on me, he placed it on the counter between us, like a final boundary. "Mom, how can you say those things?" His voice trembled, as if he were deeply wounded. "We were worried sick. We turned Chicago upside down looking for you. Do you have any idea what we've been through? Do you know Brenda has cried every single night?" He paused, looking at me as if I were a cruel stranger. "You wandered all the way here by yourself, alone. You could have been hurt. Someone could have taken advantage of you. You're not yourself anymore. The fact that you're here, in this dusty old shop, is the clearest proof of that." His voice rose, the desperation in it so convincing it almost made me second-guess myself. "We're doing this to protect you from yourself, so you won't be in danger anymore. Mom, please." He tried to push the pen into my hand. "Just sign this. Let us take care of you. It's the only right thing to do." Just then, the bell over the door chimed again. 2 uniformed police officers walked in, followed by Mr. Davies, his face grim. Mark and Brenda froze, their hands dropping away from me. The squeak of the old oak door cut through Mark's pleading. Gus stepped out from the back room. He didn't hurry. Every step he took on the old wooden floor was heavy, deliberate. His face was terrifyingly calm, the calm of a man who has lost everything and has nothing left to fear. He didn't look at Mark, who was stunned by the sudden appearance. His eyes, edged with years of sorrow, were locked on Brenda, whose face had gone as pale as wax. "Hello, Becky," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was low and clear, and it cut through the stuffy silence of the shop like a shard of broken pottery. Becky hit the ear like a whip crack. Brenda flinched, taking an involuntary step back, bumping a small table and making a stack of porcelain plates rattle. Pure, unadulterated terror flashed in her eyes, the only real emotion I had ever seen from her. I don't know who you are, she stammered, her voice thin. My name is Brenda Harlow, and my father died a long time ago. She shot a desperate, pleading look at Mark. Gus didn't get angry. He just shook his head slowly, a gesture filled with a universe of sadness. No, Becky, your father isn't dead. He was just left behind. He slowly reached into his coat pocket, a slow, dramatic motion. He pulled out not one, but two things. The first was the faded photograph of the little girl with the dragonfly bracelet. He held it up. I still remember you. I remember this face, this smile. Then he pulled out the second item, a neatly clipped stack of papers. And I remember this, too, he said, his voice turning hard with bitterness. I remember the day you took me to the clinic and told the doctor I wasn't right in the head. I remember the day you cleaned out my retirement account. I remember the day you left me, told the world I was crazy, and took everything our family had. You're lying, Brenda shrieked, panic turning to rage. Who are you? You want money, is that it? Mark, don't you see? He's a con artist. He's in on it with your mother to frame me. She was trying to regain control, to paint Gus as the villain. Mark looked utterly lost, spinning between the accusations. Mom, what is this? Who is this man? But before I could answer, Mr. Davies, who had been standing by silently, took one step forward. His voice boomed like a judge delivering a verdict, cutting through the chaos. Officers, this man's name is Augustus Miller, and we have reason to believe that Mrs. Brenda Harlow, whose birth name is Rebecca Miller, is his daughter. Mr. Davies handed a file to the lead officer. In here you will find a copy of Miss Rebecca Miller's birth certificate and bank records from 10 years ago showing a large sum of money being transferred from Mr. Miller's account to a new account in her name, just before he was declared temporarily financially incompetent. Brenda stared at the file as if it were a snake. That's fake. It's all fake. Then perhaps you can explain this, Mr. Davies said, his voice unwavering. He turned a page in his own file. We also have reason to believe that a similar scheme, constituting the crime of financial elder abuse, was being perpetrated against my client, Mrs. Carol Harlow, here today. He pointed to the guardianship papers on the counter. A scheme to seize a valuable art collection based on falsified evidence of her cognitive decline. Mark looked as though the entire world had just collapsed beneath his feet. He turned to Brenda, not with anger, but with the utter, devastating confusion of a man who knows he's been played for a fool. Brenda, you told me you were an orphan. Brenda, is any of what they're saying, is it true? Brenda didn't answer. She just stared at her father, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. Her perfect mask had shattered into a million pieces, revealing the monster underneath. The lead officer looked through the papers, then looked up, straight at Mark and Brenda. There was no doubt left in his eyes. Mr. and Mrs. Harlow, we're going to have to ask you to come with us down to the station to assist in an investigation regarding allegations of abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. Brenda was speechless. Mark just stood there, frozen like a statue, finally realizing that the invisible weight he'd been carrying was the crushing burden of the lies he had chosen to believe. A few months later, Gus's antique shop had a new sign, made of freshly varnished pine. Harlow and Miller's Fine Arts. The Miller was Gus's idea, a small but proud act of reclaiming the name his daughter had tried to erase. Brenda was prosecuted.
Faced with undeniable evidence and testimony from her own husband, she received a stiff sentence for fraud and financial elder abuse. Mark, as an accomplice, didn't escape the law either. Facing his own charges, he cooperated fully with the authorities, giving a complete testimony against Brenda in exchange for a lighter sentence. He avoided prison, but his sentence was of a different kind. The complete collapse of the life he had built on a foundation of greed and deceit. The divorce was swift. His career as an architect was ruined by the scandal. He calls once a week. His voice doesn't have its old confidence, just a hollow, hesitant quality. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. I think even he knows that an apology now would be meaningless, an insult. Instead, he talks about his therapy sessions, about trying to understand how he could have been willing to sacrifice his own mother for the promises of a stranger. I listen. I don't offer comfort, and I don't offer judgment. The betrayal of a child isn't a wound that can be healed with a few sorry words. Forgiveness is a wide river, and he's still standing on the other side. I don't know if he'll ever find the strength to swim across. And I'm not sure if I'll still be waiting on this side if he does.
It doesn't matter so much anymore. Today, I'm standing in the middle of our shop. The afternoon sun is streaming through the window, making the pottery glow. A group of young art students are listening intently as I explain the difference between a crackle glaze and an ash glaze. I see the hunger to learn in their eyes, the respect I thought I would never have again. I was left at an airport with less than $50, but I wasn't lost. I was found, not by my son, but by myself. I found myself in the broken pieces of the past, in the ashes of other people's lives. And from those ashes, I built something new, something beautiful and strong, something that is entirely my own.